Hello everyone, in this session, let's understand what is an API. Okay, for this, I'm just opening a notepad for this. So basically, API is nothing but the abbreviation is Application Programming Interface. Okay, and what does it do is like it is used for the communication between two systems. Okay. And let's say we have two computers, like computer 1, which is residing in Sydney, and there is computer 2, which is residing in Los Angeles. And these two computers want to communicate with each other. Okay. So what happens is like we need to follow some protocol while communicating with each other. Okay. So the protocol that we have are HTTP protocol, HTTP, FTP, SMTP, TCP/IP. These are some of the protocols. Okay. And why we need certain protocols or certain format which is universally available or universally accepted is like, for suppose if you're just sending some random data to the receiver, the receiver will not understand that particular data which the sender is sending. Okay. So we need certain format so that everybody in the system, both client as well as the server or the computer 1 and computer 2, the communication gets in smooth manner. Okay. So the analogy, for suppose, let's have a simple analogy for this. I want to just communicate with a person who is residing in some other part of the world. Okay. So what do you think I need for the communication to be smooth and perfect? Is like we need the language. So for suppose I am communicating in language of English and the other person is from Greek and he don't understand English, then what could be the situation? The other person who is the receiver can't understand my language. So language is one of the component for the smooth communication. And the second thing is like we need to have a context. What is the context mean? I need to say what exactly I want to talk about, the topic that I want to talk about with that particular person. Otherwise, it will be a random conversation and no one will understand. Okay, if I'm just talking randomly. Okay, so the context should be defined, like what I want to talk, the context. Okay, and the third thing that is important is the security. Okay, so security is nothing but if I am just communicating with that person, there should not be any third party or a third person listening to my conversation. It should not be interpreted or interacted with some third person. So first suppose I am just giving some OTP to the second person. So in that case, it should not be interfered or no one should get my OTP in the middle. So security is very much important for the conversation. So these are the three main components for the conversation to go smooth. Okay. So in API related terminology, we have something called client and the server. Okay. Who is the client? Client is someone who requests the resource or who requests some data. from the server. Okay. And server is someone who processes it, who process the data and provide the response to the client. Okay. So both are the systems. Okay. Both are similar to two computers, but they differ in what they do. Okay, client is someone who will request the resource or request the data, and server is someone who gives the data. So in this way, both are the computers, but the thing or the feature they do is different. Okay. Now, the very first thing, let's concentrate on this. Let's first discuss what can be the client. So client can not only be the computer, but also anything which requests the data or requests something can be termed as a client. So for suppose, even Postman is a client. Postman application that we install on our systems is a client, because here we are just sending some request and getting some response out of it. So Postman is a client, and even browser where you will just type something or you just navigate to a Google website is a client. Browser is sending the request to the Google server to get that particular web page to be launched. So browser is as well as the client. Okay. And not only this, there are many standalone applications can be called as a client. Okay. And not only this, we even the terminal can be termed as a client, because even if you just go to the command prompt and if you just ask something, so you are requesting something. Okay, if I just say, give me the manual for this. I think this is not configured on my machine. Anyway, so any command that we give change dot dot, so it will change the directory, right? So this is nothing but even the command line or a terminal is termed as a client. Okay, not only this, we have many mobile applications like Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. Okay, all of these, in all of these applications, what you do, you will just enter some reels or you will just send some request and you will get the videos to do. For example, you just request some video on the Instagram and you will just get the response with that particular video, or you can just request some name of the person on the Facebook and you will get the results. So you are sending the request and you are getting the response. So even the apps which we see on the mobile application is termed as the client. Okay. So if you just observe the client in case of Android, what will be the language of development of the mobile applications? The mobile applications for the Android will be developed in some language like Kotlin. And for the iOS, the mobile app gets developed in language called Swift, okay, or Objective-C. So if you just observe, you are having the client in one language and you don't necessarily can confirm that the server will also be in that particular language. So for suppose even if you just observe the browser, what is the browser main functionality or the main engine works upon? So for a browser, the three main things that we see on a browser is, when you just interact with some application or some URL is like you will see HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript, right? What does HTML does? It is responsible for the look and feel. Okay. So for suppose if I just enter google.com, okay, what happens? Chrome. So this is my google.com. So this particular Google um, title should be at the middle of the page, and there should be in links like Gmail, images, everything mentioned in the right of the screen. So all this will be mentioned by the HTML. This decides it. And what does CSS does? The CSS is responsible for the styling. Okay. So it is like formatting or the color combination you could see on the screen so that you will have a good visibility. And for suppose this particular color, look and feel. So styling part like font size, font color, everything will be decided by the CSS. Okay. And JavaScript is something which is responsible for the functionality. Okay. So if I just click on this particular search button and just say some API testing, this gets clicked and it opens the page. Okay, the functionality is being designed in the form of a JavaScript for a normal browser. Okay, so here your client can be designed in Java, and we never know what does the server is being designed. It can be designed in some Python. Both client and server cannot be, or it is not necessary that these two systems, client and the server, are designed with the same programming language. But how does this communication work? Because Java client, how can it understand or communicate with a server which is written in Python, or the Python server which is, how can it connect to the client or give the response to the client which is in Java? The internal functionality that works here is like there is something called JSON that comes in between this client and the server. Okay, so JSON is something which is not a programming language, but it is a famous data format. Okay, so what happens is like whenever your client wants to connect with server, it first converts the Java code into the JSON format, and then this particular server, which is of Python, will have some libraries for retrieving the data from the JSON. Okay, and it will just again communicate with client by just this is concept called serialization and deserialization. So JSON is the mediator for the communication so that the programming language will have some libraries, like for suppose Java will have a Jackson library, okay, which is responsible for the conversion between the Java to the JSON and JSON to the Java, like that. Okay, so that is how it works. Okay, even Python will have a library which is responsible for the conversion between the Python to JSON format and JSON to Python format. Okay, so like that, it is going to communicate. The communication happens between the client and the server, irrespective of the programming language that they are developed upon. Okay, so by this way, we could achieve this language barrier, right? So now let's go with the What is the other format? Before going to the context, what is the other format that we normally see? XML is the other format which is widely used before REST Assured has come into the picture. Okay, before REST is available, XML is something which is used by SOAP. Okay, okay, and it is XML is something which is having some hard structure. Okay, it is hard to understand the XML structure when compared to the JSON. JSON is so simple and is easy to understand. It will, for suppose, it will be in this format. If I want to just mention some ID, it will be in this format, like ID equal to some 123. Okay, comma, and it will just mention name, colon, some ABC, like this. The JSON format is so simple to understand. Okay, that's why it became more famous when compared to XML. And as if you just observe the architecture of SOAP itself, it is so heavy and it is somewhat difficult to understand because we have some WSDL file and everything. So most of the people nowadays are using the REST rather than the SOAP. Even REST will support both XML as well as the JSON format. Okay. So now we should discuss on the context. So who designs or who describes this context is like we have certain HTTP methods. What are the HTTP methods that we have? We have get method, post method, put, delete. So these are the things which are going to describe the context. So what does get does? Get is something which is used for the retrieval of fetching the data, okay, from the server. And post is something for the creation of data into the server. And put is something when you want to update the data. And delete, as the name suggests, it is for deletion of the entity or the data from the server. We use this method. So the context should be described. Okay, so whether you want to fetch the data or you want to create some data, update your data or delete the data. So that can be given using the context. Okay, and if you just go with this get method, so how do you just write the get method? So you said it is a get method, but what exactly you want? What is the data you want? You will be mentioning inside a query parameter or a path parameter. Okay. So what data we need? What exact data we need? We will be mentioning as part of a query parameter or a path parameter. Okay. And there is something called some barrier token or some username password for the authentication. Okay. Authentication or the authorization which will be described inside the header. Okay, when you are just sending the request, what data you need is present inside the query parameter or the path parameter, and the request that you send will have some header where you will mention the content type, not only authorization information, but also the content type. What exact content type that you need? Either you need a JSON format, a image, or some video, or some the content type will be mentioned as well as the authorization barrier token. The username password for the authentication will be mentioned in the header of the request. Okay. So by this, you could achieve the security. So because for suppose I can't just access some API which of some Instagram account of some other user. I can only access my account, right? So in this way, I am getting secured by the authentication. Okay. So that is how it works. Okay. Now let's go with the web page where we will see where exactly that particular HTTP for suppose there is a google.com. Okay. So if you just observe, let me just translate. Okay, everything is in English. So if I just inspect, are you aware of what this inspect is? This inspect is nothing but a Chrome dev tool. Okay, so where you will have the inspecting of the elements. Okay, so for suppose if I just mouse over on this, you could see that some element gets inspected. In the similar way, the API calls or the different JSON calls will be triggered over here. So for suppose if I just click on this or refresh this, the very first request, this is the request, okay, and it has some header. This is the request URL, okay, www.google.com, and you could see it is a get request, okay. And as the web page has loaded successfully, the status code is 200. 200 is nothing but everything is working fine, perfect. Okay, and if you just observe the remote address, it is pointed to some remote address colon 443. Okay, so as this is a HTTPS request, okay, as this is a HTTPS request, the port will be 443. And what is the port for HTTP? HTTP port will be 80. Okay, just remember for the HTTPS the port will be 443 and for the HTTP, the port will be 80. Okay. So now internally what happens whenever you just trigger some website on your browser? What happens is like this particular website will be pointed to some IP address. Who does this is like there will be something called DNS servers. Okay. DNS domain name services. Okay. So these DNS servers are responsible for triggering or for pointing the website to a particular IP address. Okay. To a particular IP address. Okay. So if you just observe this IP address, this will be unique for the region. So IP address will be unique for a particular region. Okay, so for suppose if you are launching this particular Google website from India, it will have some different IP address. And if you are launching from UK or USA, it will have some other IP address. Okay, so basically the website may look similar, but there might be some translations or some feature might be differed. Okay, so basically it will just point to the some IP address and you will get the particular website. And if you just observe, you could see there are multiple, just by opening this particular Google page, there are multiple calls that are made. These are all the API calls. See, if I just click on this, this is one of the API call. And for the Google logo, there is some other API call. If you just observe this particular Google has some other API call. and for ti.png there is some keyboard. So this is having some API call. And where exactly these API calls were being called is in the original request. So if you just observe this particular request, this is the original request, and and it is having the response as the HTML itself. Okay, as we said, this cannot be in always a JSON. It can be some HTML or it can be some image or anything it can be. So internally what it is happening is like for this particular website, the response that you could see is a HTML. And if you just observe this response of HTML, you could see certain functions that are being called. These functions are nothing but the JavaScript code. Okay, so let's write it up. So the response we got is a HTML, but inside that HTML, what we are having? We are having some JavaScript code, which which this particular JavaScript code is calling some APIs. Okay, or one JavaScript function can call any other JavaScript function, and that particular internal JavaScript function can call a API. So basically what it is happening, this particular function is relevant to a particular API call. Okay, so it is saying please call this particular API, and it could be in any of these APIs that is going to be called as part of this HTML. Okay, so response is having a HTML where HTML is having some JavaScript code, and inside this JavaScript code we are calling some APIs. Okay, so by this we could understand it is not that the single request which is going to be called for just opening of this particular Google website. It is a combination of API requests. So for suppose for calling this particular Google search, we have a different API. For calling this, we have a different API. So everything that JavaScript function is mentioned over here, which is responsible for calling the API. Okay, so that is how it is going to work. Okay, so let's understand, let's dig into this. So for suppose if you just observe the screen, okay, you could see there is a lot of static content inside this. So what is static content? If you just launch this Google website now, and even after 1 or 2 hours, the content, there is something called static content like Gmail, images, Google logo. All this is a static content which are not going to change at all, right? So do you really think that this particular browser has to hit the Google server which is present in some particular location every time to get these particular static data? No, right? Why we need to unnecessarily hit the Google servers to just launch the Google logo or Google search, which are static content? So what happens internally is like there is something called CDNs. Okay, there is something called CDN, which is nothing but content delivery network. Okay, what it does is like it is like a cache layer. Okay, this content delivery network, okay, will have the static content, and what Google does is like it will have a contract with the CDN providers so that they will give this whatever HTML page to that particular CDNs. Okay, CDN providers, so that the the end goal of any website is like it should launch as early as possible. So for suppose if you are just clicking on google.com and it is taking some 10 minutes to launch this particular google.com, will you just launch this google.com anytime? No, right? Because we need the content to be delivered as soon as possible, right? So if this particular content has to be launched every time from the Google server, okay, it takes some more time for the launching purpose. So rather than doing that, what this CDNs does is it will have the static content, okay. In the These CDNs will be present near to you, like some 20, 30 kilometers from here. Okay, so that the content will be delivered as early as possible. Okay, the static content can be delivered as early as possible using this CDNs. Okay, rather than hitting the Google server every time. Okay, and there is also a dynamic content in this particular web page. What is the dynamic content in this particular web page? My profile, right? This is my profile and we'll have some profile pic. So all these are dynamic content because you will have some other profile ID and profile icon, and I will have a different profile pic and a profile icon, right? So this is a dynamic content. So in case of this dynamic content, the JavaScript which is going to call, what happens in this condition? The JavaScript will first verify whether the browser has been logged in by a user or not. If it receives the S message, if it thinks that, or if it retrieves the information that someone has already logged in and this is a S condition, then it will verifies who has logged in. How can it get who has logged in information? It can get it from the cookies. Okay. Do you know cookies? These cookies are something which will be saved for or particular to a particular user. Okay. Cookies are unique for a user. Okay, you will have some cookie information and I will have a different cookie information. So these cookies will have the information of who has logged in. So now what this JavaScript function does is like it now as it got the information that someone has logged in and it got the information as who has logged in. What it does is like it will request the Google server by providing the user information which it got from the cookies to Google website. And what it gets the response, gets the profile pic and profile information from that server. Okay, from that Google server. This is what happens for the dynamic content. For the static content, it is delivered from the CDNs. For the dynamic content, this is what it happens. It is going to hit the Google servers. Okay. I hope you are understanding till now. Okay. So let's proceed further. Okay, let's till now, what we have discussed everything or most of the thing about the client. Okay, so now let's concentrate on the server. Okay, now server. Okay, so for suppose, as we said already, server is also a computer. Okay, so what does a computer require? A computer requires an operating system. That we know, right? There should be some operating system for this particular computer. So if you just see server, don't think it is something extraordinary that is happening for a server or some big system or something like that. Even server is something, it's like a computer. Okay, and if it is a computer, it should have some operating system. And what is the most useful, like most widely used operating system for a server? The most useful and most widely used operating system for a server will be a Linux based, because Linux based servers are something which will have the updates triggered for very frequently and will have a greater security. Okay, so Linux are something where you will have the updates for the security patches, and you will have a good look and good performance for a Linux based servers. And there is some other operating system which is launched by Windows, which is called Windows Server. This particular operating system is basically launched by the Windows owners just for the server itself, for the server operating system itself. I think you know about this. We have Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows Server. There is also a operating system called Windows Server, which is dedicatedly being designed for the server operating system. Okay, so if we just, this is in the past. Okay, but nowadays most of the operating systems are the Linux based, and the very most commonly used operating system is something called Red Hat. Okay, which is called, the even we have the free version as well as the enterprise version, which is called RHEL. Okay, which is nothing but Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Okay, so this is the most widely used operating system for the server. Okay, and once we have the operating system, is it sufficient just having the operating system? No, right? We should have some other components. So what is the second component that we need for a server is like we have a web server. Just consider this particular web server as some application running on the server machine. Okay, what it does is like its main task is to, it listens the incoming requests and sends it to something called app server. Okay, there is something called app server. So the third component is the app server, which is the most important component, which is responsible for the processing of your request. Okay, so how is this app service being designed? It is being designed using some servlets, Java servlets, or some Spring framework. Okay, so these are the programming or the frameworks used for designing the app server. Okay, so what these have is like these have the code or the methods for the processing of the request. Okay, so what we have understood, we have an operating system, and inside this operating system we have a web server which is used for the incoming or listening to the incoming requests, and inside this we have something called app server which is used for the processing of the requests. And now once the request has been processed, what happens, it will again go to the web server, and from web server, okay, from web server it again goes in the reverse manner through the internet connection. It will be going to the client. So this is how it works. Okay. So now let's understand what exactly this app server does. Okay. So what it does is like first it will have a library to understand what is the request that is coming. Like what is the type of request that is coming out. So whether it is a get request or a post request, put request, or a delete request, it will understand. And based on that, it will authenticate. So authentication is very important, right? Because if you are not an authorized user and you're just requesting something from the server, it is not a good practice to just give the data to whoever person we need. So it should be the person should be the authenticated. That means the client who is requesting the data should be an authorized or the authenticated user. Okay, so it will checks on the authentication and the authorization. Okay, and next, where does we provide this authentication and authorization? We get it from the header. As we have discussed, this header will have the relevant information related to authentication and the authorization, right? The request header. And now the third thing it does is like it will process and response and returns the status code, whether it is correct. If it is correct, the status code will be 200. If it is not able to find that resource, it will be 400 not found. And also the status response and the response body. Okay, that is how it works. Okay, so by this we understood how the server works and the client works, and how internally what does an API mean. So in the next lecture, let's understand with a sample example like how a get call can be made and all of these going forward. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this session, and just go through this video and just understand the concept. Then it will be easy for you to go forward. Okay, thank you one and all. Have a nice day.